So today I want to tell you the secret of how to deal with an IRS tax lien. And if you are experiencing that or about to experience it, you really want to stay tuned to this video and stay to the very end so you can find out what really truly is the easiest way to do this. So we're getting started right now. Hey y'all, Debbie Dobbins, Queen of Magic. And yes, would you like to magically make that IRS tax lien go away? I know I did. I've done it twice. And the thing about this is it's so important you probably are one of those people because you have a lien or you're about to have a lien that you see the commercials that come on TV that say, we're going to get your tax lien cut into pennies on the dollar. Well, that's true. It can be done. And what they don't tell you is they're going to charge you money to do that. So what I want to tell you is about a beautiful thing that the IRS has called an offer in compromise. That's what all of these salespeople are going to do for you. And here's the really good news. And I'm going to do a separate video on step by step of how to do the offer. But what I want to tell you right now is that if you have a tax lien or you're about to have a tax lien, the IRS is not your enemy. Now, believe me when I say, I used to think that the IRS was my enemy. As a matter of fact, the reason that I personally had a tax lien years ago was because when I was young, and I will be fully transparent, I'm a hippie at heart. I am. I'm a hippie at heart. I was, raised in the 70s, and I believe that people that are taking care of my money, whether it be the church or the government or the city, municipalities, that they should be good stewards with my money because they're taking it without my permission. So I was very principled, right? I had a certain value system, and that was that my perception of the United States of America government, the federal government, was not doing a very good job of that. They were doing a terrible job, as a matter of fact, because I understood what budgeting was. And so, therefore, I decided I was not going to file tax returns. I was in my 20s, and believe me, I was very free-thinking. I look back on that and I think, I really trusted myself and my free thinking, but at the same time, we also live in a world that sometimes you can't be as free thinking as you would like, no matter how much they say we have freedom here. But I digress. So years and years and years, and of course now I want to also put this into perspective. This was back in the 70s and the early 80s when the IRS did not have tons of computers, right? They just didn't. So nowadays, that would be really hard to do anyways. But back in the day, if you ever watched Catch Me If You Can, you kind of understand what I'm talking about. Back then, I was not filing income tax returns. Because if you file an income tax return, then they really know what's happening. And they did know what was happening because the employer files a W-2. But for some reason, they never caught up with me. Now, I know that's hard to imagine. But this went on for probably 2 decades because it wasn't until the late 90s that I decided to do something about this. Now, the thing about it is they never came after me directly, right? They didn't come to where my work was. They didn't come to where I lived. And the only thing that they did was they were accumulating what they believed I owed in taxes based on what the employers had sent in for a W-2. They just will calculate your taxes. That's what the IRS does. And they came up with this number. And then they're the only entity on the planet that can find an interest that they feel comfortable with, which is a lot. So a little tiny debt turned into a massive debt. So by the time they filed a lien, and when you file a lien, it's just a matter of recording it in the county of record. It doesn't mean that they come and necessarily attach your property because they didn't know where I was, apparently, which is fine. That doesn't happen anymore in today's world. But back then, I had this lien sitting that was a recorded item in the county of Los Angeles that prevented me from buying a house. Because, by the way, this is another video. If you have bad credit or you have troubled credit, then you have trouble buying a house. Now, you have to kind of also put this in context that I was giving loans. I was being a mortgage provider for people for every known credit problem on the planet, except for this one I could not overcome for me. I was helping people achieve the American dream day after day after day after day after day after day. And after a while I thought, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out how I can get rid of this cancer, which at that time, this cancer was a federal tax lien of $150,000. Because I either had to pay that $150,000 off in order to buy property, or had to figure out a way to mitigate it somehow. And so I was watching these commercials, much like you probably are watching these commercials, about how to reduce your IRS tax lien by pennies on the dollar. And I thought, because I like to figure things out. And there's a lot of things that are scary out there that lawyers do and doctors do and accountants do that people don't understand. So they put their trust in the hands of these people, and then they make a ton of money, and you're not necessarily getting the deal they told you were going to. Well, I said, okay, let me figure it out. So I did. This was in 2000 maybe. I figured out what these people do that sell this stuff on television. It's called an offer in compromise. That's all it is. It's the form. You can go to the IRS website, type in offer in compromise. The form will pull up. You can file it online even. And it's really not that hard. So I'm going to show you a video of step by step by step. But let me just tell you, it's not that hard. What I found out, which was amazing, is that when you file an offer in compromise, you actually get to speak to a human being at the IRS. So if you've ever tried to just pick up the phone, call the IRS, call an 800 number, that's virtually impossible. And you also get a customer service person that's not been trained to do anything. But here's what is important to note. The IRS is not here to be the enemy. I learned that in a very interesting way by filing this offer in compromise. They really do want to help us. They're not here to hurt people. I know that sounds like crazy, and I almost want to think I'm crazy by saying it, because this whole story about the IRS has been built up over years and years and years. As a matter of fact, my uncle, I have a whole history in my family that he, went off the grid in order to avoid the IRS because they were so oppressive. But everyone has their own experiences. My experience with the IRS has been nothing short of magnificent, and I've had 3 or 4 direct experiences on levels that you can't even imagine, and every single person was kind to me. So if you go in it with that idea, then it's going to be a lot easier. Let me tell you what makes a good offer in compromise, though. This is really, really important, because I think whether you go call the guy on TV, the lawyer, or you hear it from me, the IRS has a rule of thumb. It's kind of like when you apply for assistance of any kind from a governmental agency. Let's say, in my case, my lien was $150,000. And a large majority of that was penalties and interest. But at the time, see, my magic works in really interesting ways. At the very time, because they go actually a year backwards. At the year before this, I was making virtually nothing because I was poor. And at that point, I was using the previous year's income as my basis for how much I could ever repay. Now, if you are in a financially prudent position and you're trying to just get rid of a tax lien and you could pay it off, your chances are diminished to get it reduced substantially. Because what the IRS is going to do is look at your current financial position, look at how much you owe, and say, you know what, this much we believe you could pay. Now, the thing about an offer in compromise is, and this is not a repayment plan. So those are two different things. I'm strictly talking about an offer in compromise. In an offer in compromise, you have to pay the entire amount that you compromise it for right then and there. Right then and there. So you have to figure out a way to get the money. In my particular case, in this scenario, my tax lien was $150,000, and based on what I had earned the previous year, they determined, and we determined together, because we talked about it, that $30,000 would be the amount that they would accept for full resolution of that lien. I would be lien-free, clear and free from the IRS up until that point if I gave them $30,000 in cash. The good news was, in that particular case, I had already started escalating my business again, and the $30,000 was available to me. I could have borrowed it from a family member. I could have put it on a credit card. I could have got a loan. Any of those scenarios would have worked. The IRS doesn't care how you get the money. But the thing is, had I been making $150,000 at that point where they took the tax returns and I owed $150,000, it's highly unlikely that my offer and compromise would have been $30,000. It might have been $50,000. It might have been $75,000. But hey, if you can get $50,000 off what you owe, that's a good deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a video on how to fill out the offer and compromise. But at this juncture, what I want you to do is if you do have a lien and or you're about to have a lien, figure out how much that lien is, but figure out how much you made last year, because that's the year that they're going to go by. That's all they can do. They can only take a tax return that's already been filed, and hopefully you filed it. So once you file that, once that tax return's been filed and you know how much you made that year, I can tell you it's going to be approximately that amount. Whatever this is what you made, this is what you owe. That's probably the total that they're going to ask for the offer and compromise. There's no set schedule or barometer to say they'll settle for 10 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar or 75 cents on the dollar. It truly is that whatever you made is what they're going to drive and determine how much you can pay. And all of the debts that you currently have. I will give you one more piece of information, and that is that if all of your debts include credit cards and student loans, that is going to not necessarily be counted in your overall debt load. It's kind of like applying for a mortgage, except for the IRS, and God love them, they do have a point that they feel like that's voluntary debt. So your housing, your car payment, your medical insurance, your telephone bill, your utilities, those things they will take into the overall picture. So if you only have, $50 left over in the month after this is subtracted from your income that was supported by that previous tax return, then you have a much better opportunity to get a lower compromise than you would if you had all of your debt was credit cards. Because their position, and I understand this, is we are really not concerned about all of that voluntary debt that you took up with a credit card because it isn't essential to your living. So that was a lot of information. And if you have any questions, I always invite a discovery call because I'd be more than happy to share with you how this process works in more detail. And stay tuned for the video on how to actually file the offer and compromise. And as I always say, live a magical life, and y'all come back now, you hear?